I thought I was running from one groom, but the man waiting in the alley needed a wife more than the one I had left behind. The ballroom doors closed behind me with a soft golden click, too gentle for the sound of a life breaking open. Music still played on the other side. Violins, champagne laughter, polite applause for a wedding that had not happened yet. I could still hear my name floating through the hotel corridor in whispers. Hannah Miller. The bride. The girl with the perfect lace dress, the perfect pearl earrings, the perfect groom waiting beneath a ceiling full of chandeliers. Perfect was what people called a cage when it matched the flowers. My dress dragged behind me as I ran toward the service exit, heavy with beadwork and panic. The hem caught on the corner of a brass luggage cart, tearing with a sharp little sound that made me flinch. I did not stop. I could not stop. Not after what I had heard in the coat room 10 minutes earlier, when Caleb Price lowered his voice and forgot the door was cracked open. After midnight, her signature is all we need, he had said. The debt transfers clean. Hannah will not even understand the paperwork until it is too late. I stood there with my bouquet in both hands and felt every white rose turn into a witness. Debt. Transfer. Signature. 3 words that explain the rush, the expensive hotel, the pressure from his parents, the way Caleb had smiled whenever I asked why the documents had to be signed during the reception. He had called them estate forms. Marriage formalities. A way to protect our future. But I knew what protection sounded like when it was really a leash. My mother had lived under one for years, smiling in church while my stepfather made every choice small enough to fit inside his pocket. I had promised myself I would never mistake control for love. Then I almost married it in satin. The service hallways smelled like lemon cleaner, rain-soaked coats, and hot food waiting under silver lids. My heels slipped on the polished floor. I yanked them off and kept running barefoot, the marble cold enough to sting. Behind me, someone called my name. Maybe a bridesmaid. Maybe Caleb. I shoved through the exit door and burst into the alley behind the hotel. Chicago rain hit my face like a slap. The city outside was dark and wet, all black brick, steam rising from vents, garbage bins shining under security lights. I took 3 steps before I realized the alley was not empty. 4 black SUVs waited in a silent line, engines humming low, headlights off. Men in dark suits stood near the vehicles, not talking, not smoking, not surprised by the rain. Every instinct in my body screamed that I had run out of one trap and straight into another. One of the men stepped toward me. I backed up so fast my shoulder hit the brick wall. "Do not touch me," I said, though my voice shook hard enough to betray me. The man stopped immediately. Not because I scared him. Because someone behind him lifted one hand. The rear door of the middle SUV opened. A man stepped out into the rain without hurrying. Tall, broad-shouldered, white skin, dark hair pushed back from a face made of sharp lines and colder patience. His black suit looked untouched by chaos, as if storms waited for his permission before ruining anything. The men around him shifted without a word. The alley belonged to him. He looked at my torn dress, my bare feet, the bouquet crushed against my chest, and finally the ring still burning on my finger. His mouth curved slightly, not kindly. "Perfect," he said. I needed a wife. I stared at him, rain sliding down my face like tears I refused to give Caleb. "I am not marrying another monster tonight." The man's gray eyes held mine. For a moment, the alley went so quiet I could hear water dripping from the fire escape above us. Then he said, "Good. Then do not marry. Negotiate. Negotiate." The word sounded absurd in the rain, standing barefoot in an alley with my wedding dress torn at the hem and a stranger in a black suit watching me like I had become useful at the exact wrong moment. "I do not negotiate with men who introduce themselves by needing wives," I said. His mouth almost moved again, not quite a smile, not quite approval. Vincent Cross. The name hit the alley before the rain could soften it. I knew it the way people in Chicago knew certain names without ever being formally taught. Cross Holdings. Cross Restaurants. Cross Construction. Cross Charities with annual galas where senators smiled too hard. And beneath all of that, whispered stories my mother used to lower her voice around. Men who did not need to raise their hands because the city had already learned to move out of their way. My fingers tightened around the crushed bouquet. You are worse than Caleb. Possibly. The honesty startled me. But tonight, I am not the man who put debt papers inside a wedding reception. My stomach went cold. How do you know about that? Vincent glanced toward the hotel's service door. Because Caleb Price was supposed to meet me in that ballroom after midnight. The rain seemed to fall harder. Behind me, the music inside swelled, muffled by brick and steel, cheerful enough to make me feel sick. Meet you for what? To offer your signature as collateral for a debt he cannot pay. The alley tilted. I had heard enough in the coat room to run, but not enough to understand the shape of the trap. Collateral. The word made my skin crawl because it turned me from a bride into paperwork. No, I whispered. I never agreed to anything. That is why he needed the ceremony. Vincent's voice stayed low, controlled, almost gentle in its precision. A wife is easier to pressure than a fiancé with cold feet. I wanted to hate him for saying it so plainly. Instead, the truth sat between us like a broken glass neither of us could pretend not to see. A sharp knock sounded from the service door behind me. Once. Twice. Caleb's voice followed, smooth and strained. Hannah? Honey, open the door. Everyone is worried. Honey. The word slipped through the rain wearing the same costume it had worn for 8 months. Soft. Loving. Owned. I stepped away from the door so quickly I nearly tripped on my own dress. Vincent moved 1 inch, just enough for one of his men to place himself between me and the entrance without touching me. Do you want to go back inside? Vincent asked. I stared at him. Is that a joke? No, his eyes did not leave mine. I do not make decisions for women who are running from men who already did. Something in my chest tightened. It should not have mattered. One decent sentence from a dangerous stranger should not have felt like air. But it did. Caleb knocked again, harder this time, though still polite enough for anyone listening. Hannah, this is embarrassing. Come inside and we can fix it. I laughed once, a small cracked sound. Fix it, I repeated. He means finish it. Vincent's gaze sharpened, not at me, but at the door. Then here is the negotiation. I looked back at him, rain dripping from my veil onto my shoulders. I need to appear at my estate tonight with a wife. Not in a bedroom. Not at an altar. In a room full of people trying to force an alliance I did not choose. That sounds like your problem. It is. He inclined his head slightly. And Caleb is yours. The honesty again. No sugar. No false rescue. Just 2 cages placed side by side in the rain. You want me to pretend to be your wife? For 72 hours. And in return? My attorneys remove your name from every document Caleb prepared. My people make sure he cannot reach you without witnesses. You get a phone, a room with a lock on your side, and transportation anywhere you choose when the agreement ends. I swallowed. That sounds rehearsed. Because consent should be specific. The sentence landed harder than his name had. I hated that I liked it. I hated that Caleb, with his church smile and soft hands, had never once spoken to me like my yes mattered as much as my no. The service door handle rattled. Caleb's voice dropped lower. Hannah, do not make me come out there. Vincent held my gaze. Your terms. My heart pounded so hard it drowned out the rain. I looked at the door. Then at the SUVs. Then at the man who had asked for a wife like a king ordering weather, and somehow still waited for my answer. 3 conditions, I said. Separate room. My own phone. And if I say stop, this ends immediately. Vincent nodded once. Agreed. The service door opened behind us, spilling gold light into the alley. Caleb stepped out, perfect tuxedo, perfect face, perfect lie. There you are, he said, reaching the word like a hand. I looked at Vincent Cross and made the first reckless choice of my life. 72 hours, I said. Then get in, he replied. I got into the SUV before Caleb reached the edge of the service door, and the sound of it closing behind me felt nothing like safety. It felt like stepping off a ledge because the room behind me was already on fire. The interior was warm, dark, and silent, all black leather and rain-speckled glass. My torn dress filled half the back seat, white satin spilling over my bare feet like a story I no longer believed in. Vincent slid in beside me, leaving a careful space between us that somehow felt louder than touch. One of his men shut the door. Caleb's face appeared through the wet window a second later, pale with disbelief beneath the alley light. He lifted one hand, not waving, not knocking, just pressing his palm against the glass, as if he could still claim what was behind it. "Drive," Vincent said. The SUV moved before Caleb could speak. I watched the hotel shrink behind us, its golden windows glowing like a jewelry box full of people who would soon be told I had lost my mind. My bouquet lay in my lap, crushed and dripping. The ring on my finger felt tighter with every block. I twisted it once, but it would not come off. Vincent noticed. Of course he did. "Leave it for now," he said. "It may be useful." I turned sharply. "Useful to whom?" "To prove what he tried to bind you with." His voice stayed even. "Not to bind you again." I hated how quickly he understood the difference. Outside, Chicago blurred past in wet streaks of red taillights, closed storefronts, and sidewalks shining under street lamps. "Where are you taking me?" I asked. "My estate north of the city." "Estate sounds worse than house." "It is." I almost laughed, but the sound broke before it became real. "And this room full of people trying to force an alliance. Who are they?" Vincent looked out the window for a moment. "My father's old counsel. Men who believe my position can be managed if they place the right woman beside me." "So you're using me to avoid being controlled?" "Yes." The answer was immediate. "No romance. No costume. Just truth. And I am using you to avoid being controlled." "Also yes." I looked at him then, really looked. Rainlight moved across the hard angles of his face, the set of his jaw, the gray eyes that seemed built to find exits in every room. He did not look sorry for being dangerous. He looked sorry that danger had become the language we both understood. My phone was gone, left somewhere inside the hotel. My mother was gone, buried with every warning she had tried to teach me. Caleb was behind us, probably already shaping the story. And beside me sat Vincent Cross, a man who needed a wife the way storms needed pressure, offering me terms in the back of a car at midnight. "I want my own phone before we get there," I said. Vincent reached into the side compartment and took out a sealed box. New. Unopened. He set it on the seat between us, closer to me. "Already arranged." I stared at it. "You planned for someone else." "I planned for leverage." "That is not comforting." It was not meant to be. I opened the box with wet fingers, suddenly aware of how cold I was. My hands were shaking. Not delicately. Not beautifully. Shaking the way a body does when it has been polite through too much fear. Vincent removed his coat and placed it on the empty space between us, not over my shoulders, not on my lap, just there. "Available." "No," I said automatically. "All right." He did not argue. The coat stayed where it was. That was when my throat tightened, because Caleb would have told me I was being difficult. Caleb would have draped it over me anyway and called it caring. Vincent simply let the offer remain without turning it into a debt. The phone powered on. There were no contacts, no messages, no past. For one impossible second, I envied it. Then a headline appeared in a news alert before I had even finished setting it up. "Bride vanishes from luxury Chicago wedding amid rumors of criminal interference." My stomach dropped. Vincent looked at the screen, then at me. He moved fast. He always did when he wanted people looking at anything except the truth. The SUV turned through iron gates I had not seen coming. Beyond them, a long driveway curved through dark trees toward a mansion lit in warm gold against the rain. At the top of the steps, several men waited beneath the portico, all in suits, all watching the car like they had been expecting a war instead of a woman in a ruined wedding dress. Vincent opened his door, then paused. "When we go inside, they will call you Mrs. Cross." My heart kicked. I am not. I know. He stepped out into the rain and turned back, offering no hand, only the open door and the choice beyond it. Make them believe it anyway. I stepped out of the SUV because staying inside would have made me look like cargo, and I was done being carried by other people's plans. Rain touched my bare shoulders before I remembered Vincent's coat on the seat behind me. I did not reach for it. If I was going to walk into a room full of men who thought women were alliances with pulse rates, I wanted them to see the torn hem, the ruined bouquet, the ring still stuck on my finger, and the fact that I was not hiding behind anyone's jacket. The mansion rose above me in pale stone and black windows, too large to be called a home, too quiet to be called welcoming. Under the portico, the men waiting for Vincent stared at me with the same expression guests had worn at the hotel when the bride disappeared from the script. Surprise first, then judgment, then calculation. Vincent came around the car but did not offer his arm. He stopped beside me, leaving enough space for the rain to pass between us. "Ready?" he asked. No, his gray eyes shifted toward mine. "Good. Honest starts better than ready." I hated that the sentence steadied me. We walked up the steps together. The front doors opened before we reached them, and warm light spilled across the marble floor inside. The foyer was enormous, all dark wood, brass lamps, and a staircase wide enough for a movie star entrance. But there was no music here. No flowers. No fake blessing wrapped around a contract. Just silence and men in suits watching Vincent Cross bring home a bride who looked like she had escaped a storm because she had. An older man with silver hair stood near the base of the stairs, leaning on a polished cane he clearly did not need. His eyes moved over me, stopping at the torn lace near my ankle. "This is unacceptable," he said. Vincent removed his wet gloves slowly. "This is my wife." The word hit my ribs even though I knew it was pretend. Wife. Caleb had tried to turn it into a signature. Vincent had turned it into a shield. I still did not know which one scared me more. The older man's mouth tightened. "You expect the council to believe you married a woman you found behind a hotel?" "No," Vincent said. "I expect the council to adjust." A few of the men shifted. No one laughed. I realized then that Vincent was not the loudest man in the house because he did not have to be. The room bent around him quietly, like metal remembering heat. The older man looked at me. "What is your name?" My throat felt dry. For half a second, I almost said Hannah Miller, because that was still mine. Then I remembered the headline already calling me vanished. I remembered Caleb outside the SUV, palm on the glass. I remembered debt transfers and midnight signatures. "Hannah," I said. "And I can answer questions without being inspected like damaged furniture." The silence after that was different. Sharper. Somewhere behind me, one of Vincent's men made the smallest sound, quickly swallowed. Vincent did not look at me, but I saw his hand still on the glove he was folding. The older man's eyes narrowed. Bold for someone in borrowed circumstances. Better than being sold in permanent ones. The sentence left me before fear could edit it. This time, Vincent did look at me. Not with anger. Not with warning. With something more dangerous to my balance. Interest. Real, focused interest, as if he had expected a frightened bride and found a lit match instead. The older man's face hardened, but before he could answer, a soft voice came from the staircase. "Vincent?" A girl stood halfway down, maybe 16, wrapped in an oversized gray sweater, pale hair falling loose around her shoulders. Her eyes were wide and anxious, fixed on me rather than the men. The whole room changed around her. Vincent's posture shifted by a fraction, barely visible, but I felt it. Every line of him became less king and more wall. "Lily," he said, quieter. "Go back upstairs." She ignored him and came down 2 more steps. "Is she the reason they cannot make you marry Valentina?" The name moved through the foyer like a cold draft. The older man with the cane snapped, "Lily." She flinched. Vincent did not raise his voice. "Do not speak to my sister that way." The room went still. Sister. This was the alliance. This was the pressure point. Not money. Not pride. A girl in a gray sweater looking at me like my ruined wedding dress might have saved her from something. I looked from Lily to Vincent, and the negotiation changed shape inside me. Caleb had needed my signature. Vincent needed a wife. But Lily needed an escape from a room where men spoke about women like doors to be locked. I lifted my chin. "If anyone is asking whether I chose to be here," I said, my voice clearer than I felt I did. Vincent's eyes returned to mine. For the first time, the faintest crack appeared in his control. Not a smile. Not gratitude. Something quieter. Recognition. The older man struck his cane once against the marble, not hard, just enough to reclaim attention. Then prove it at the council table. Vincent's gaze darkened. Not tonight. I stepped forward before he could refuse for me. Tonight is exactly when. Tonight is exactly when. The words left my mouth before I had time to measure their danger, and once they were out, every man in the foyer looked at me like I had stepped onto a chessboard wearing white satin and no sense of self-preservation. Maybe I had. My feet were cold against the marble. My dress was torn. My hair had fallen from its careful wedding pins, and rainwater still ran down the back of my neck. I did not look like anyone's wife. I looked like the evidence of a failed transaction. But Lily stood frozen on the staircase, her face pale, her fingers gripping the banister as if the entire house might tilt if she let go. That was what kept me from taking the words back. Vincent turned toward me slowly. Hannah. Just my name. Not a warning. Not a command. Still, it carried weight. You said 72 hours, I reminded him. This is part of the hours. The older man with the cane watched us with narrowed eyes. She speaks for you now? Vincent did not look away from me. No, then he turned to the man. She speaks for herself. The silence after that made my pulse stumble. It was not romantic. It was not soft. It was the sound of a room discovering a rule it did not like. The council table was in a room beyond the foyer, a long dark dining room with windows facing the rain and portraits of cross men staring down from paneled walls. No women in the paintings. I noticed that immediately. Men in black suits took seats along both sides of the table. Vincent sat at the head, because of course he did. I stood beside the chair to his right until one of the men gave a small, amused breath. Do brides not sit where they come from? He asked. Usually beside the groom, I said, and pulled the chair out myself. The legs scraped across the floor too loudly. Good. Let the house hear me. Vincent's mouth did not move, but his eyes warmed by half a degree. The older man introduced himself as Thomas Cross, Vincent's uncle, though he spoke like an owner reading damage reports. He explained the situation in clean phrases that hid dirty hands. The family required stability. The alliance with the Moretti family would protect Lily. Vincent had acted impulsively. My appearance was inconvenient. Temporary theatrics would not overturn long-standing arrangements. Arrangements, I said quietly. Thomas looked at me. Yes, Mrs. Cross. Arrangements. The title landed between us. Fake. Sharp. Useful. I folded my hands on the table so no one would see them shaking. I spent the last hour learning how men use polite words when they mean to trap a woman. Arrangement sounds a lot like one of those words. Several heads turned. Thomas's jaw tightened. You know nothing about this family. I know enough to recognize when a girl on a staircase looks afraid of her future. That made the room change. Not explode. Just tighten. Lily had not come into the dining room, but I could feel her presence somewhere beyond the door, listening. Vincent's voice came low from beside me. Hannah. This time, I heard the caution. I ignored it, which was either brave or stupid, and I had no energy left to separate the two. You wanted proof I chose to be here, I said, looking at Thomas. Fine. I chose this room over the ballroom I ran from. I chose a 72-hour agreement over a lifetime of paperwork someone else wrote. I chose terms. Separate room. My own phone. The right to walk away. If your alliance cannot survive a woman asking for that much, maybe it was never protection. No one spoke. Rain tapped against the windows like fingers counting down. Thomas leaned back slowly. And what does Vincent get from this noble performance? I looked at Vincent then. He had gone very still. Not angry. Not surprised. Something harder to read. He gets time, I said. And his sister gets a choice. The word sister did what no argument had done. It cracked something under the table. A younger man near the end shifted uncomfortably. Another looked away. Thomas's cane rested against his knee, his fingers curved around the handle. You are very confident for a woman who arrived barefoot. I glanced down at my cold feet beneath the ruined dress. That is because I learned tonight that shoes are not what make a woman stand. For the first time, Vincent Cross smiled. Not the smirk from the alley. Not the dangerous curve that made him look like a man who could buy silence by the pound. This was smaller. Almost unwilling. Thomas saw it and hated it. The council will reconvene in the morning, he said. Until then, your bride is a question, not an answer. Vincent stood, and every chair seemed to become less comfortable around him. Then asked carefully. He turned to me. We're done for tonight. I rose too quickly, and the room blurred for half a second. Vincent noticed, but he did not touch me. He simply moved his hand near the back of my chair, close enough to steady if I chose to lean, far enough not to claim. I did not lean. But I knew I could. Outside the dining room, Lily waited in the hallway, eyes bright. She whispered as I passed, "Thank you." 2 words. Smaller than the storm. Heavier than the ring still stuck on my finger. And suddenly, 72 hours felt much longer than I had agreed to. The guest room Vincent gave me had a lock on my side, just like he promised. That should not have made me cry. It was only a small brass turn bolt beneath the handle, nothing dramatic, nothing beautiful, but I stood in front of it for nearly a minute with my ruined bouquet in one hand and my wedding ring still trapped on the other, staring at proof that someone dangerous had remembered my terms better than the man who had almost become my husband. The room itself was quiet and gray, overlooking the rain-dark gardens behind the estate. A fire burned low in a marble fireplace. Fresh clothes sat folded on the bed, black sweatpants, a soft white sweater, thick socks, all with the tags still attached. Beside them was the phone Vincent had given me, a charger, a glass of water, and a note written in neat block letters. Door locks from inside. No one enters unless you say so. Press 9 for Mrs. Vale. Press 0 for me. I read it twice, then hated myself for how badly I wanted to believe it. Caleb had called control protection. Vincent wrote protection down like instructions and left the room. I locked the door. The click sounded louder than the storm. For the first time all night, nobody was watching me. That was when the shaking started. Not graceful trembling. Not the kind of sadness that looks pretty in candlelight. My whole body turned against me, teeth chattering, knees weak, breath breaking apart as if the ballroom, the alley, the council table, and Lily's whispered thank you had all been waiting outside my skin for permission to enter at once. I sank onto the edge of the bed and pulled at Caleb's ring again. It would not move. My finger was swollen from rain and panic, and the diamond looked obscene against my skin, bright and smug, like it still belonged to the story he had written. I tried soap from the bathroom. Lotion. Cold water. Nothing worked. The harder I pulled, the more trapped I felt. Finally, I grabbed the new phone and pressed 0 before pride could stop me. Vincent answered on the first ring. Hannah? Just my name. No impatience. No victory. I swallowed. The ring will not come off. Silence, brief and focused. Do you want help? I closed my eyes. There it was again. Want. The word kept arriving where order should have been. Yes. I will send Mrs. Vale. No, the answer left me before I understood it. I opened my eyes, staring at the ring. You. But bring her too. All right. He arrived 3 minutes later with Mrs. Vale, a woman in her 60s with silver hair, warm eyes, and the kind of calm that made panic feel slightly embarrassed. Vincent stayed outside the doorway until I unlocked it myself. He did not step in until I moved back. Mrs. Vale carried a small tray with ice, thread, oil, and a towel. Engagement rings always think too highly of themselves, she said, and I almost laughed. Almost. She sat beside me and worked gently, wrapping thread beneath the band, easing the swelling down, murmuring ordinary things about rain and nerves and stubborn jewelry. Vincent stood near the fireplace, turned slightly away, giving the moment more privacy than Caleb had ever given my thoughts. The ring slid free with one sharp sting and dropped onto the towel. Such a small sound. Such a huge ending. My hand looked naked without it. Bruised, pale, mine. Mrs. Vale patted my wrist. There now. She left with the tray and the ring, asking no questions. Vincent remained by the fire. What will you do with it? I asked. Whatever you want. I looked at him. Can it help prove the documents? Maybe. Then keep it as evidence. His eyes held mine. Evidence, he repeated. Not memory. My throat tightened. Exactly. The phone on the bed buzzed before either of us could speak again. A news alert lit the screen. Missing bride seen leaving with Vincent Cross. Sources fear coercion. Under it was a photo of me stepping into his SUV, dress torn, face pale, his dark figure beside me. Caleb had found his angle. My stomach dropped. Vincent picked up the phone only after I nodded. He read the headline, then set it down carefully. He is making you look taken. Because it is easier than admitting I walked away. My voice sounded tired, but not weak. Vincent looked toward the rain-dark window. I can shut the story down. With what? Fear. He did not answer. That was answer enough. I stood, barefoot in the thick carpet, free of the ring and still not free of the lie. No, I said. I speak first. Vincent turned back to me. For once, he looked almost surprised. To whom? I picked up the phone, my hand steadier than it had been all night. Everyone. Everyone sounded impossible until I realized Caleb had already spoken to everyone for me. By the time I changed into the white sweater and black sweatpants Mrs. Vale had left on the bed, my name was moving through Chicago faster than the rain sliding down Vincent's windows. Runaway bride. Missing woman. Criminal interference. Sources close to the groom. Those words kept appearing on the new phone screen like little locked doors. None of them had my voice behind them. I stood in the guest room mirror and barely recognized myself without the veil, without the ring, without the dress that had made me look expensive enough to be believed and fragile enough to be dismissed. My eyes were red. My hair was damp and tangled. My face was bare. For the first time all night, I looked like the truth. Vincent waited in the hall with Mrs. Vale, not entering until I opened the door. You do not have to do this tonight, he said. Yes, I do. They will question everything. They already are. His gaze held mine. Then we make sure they question the right things. The media room was smaller than I expected, tucked behind the library, with dark green walls, a long table, and one camera set on a tripod. No crew. No bright lights. No stranger touching powder to my face or telling me to look softer. Just Vincent's communications man checking the frame while Mrs. Vale placed a glass of water near my hand. No edits, Vincent said. Full statement or nothing. I looked at him. You are not standing beside me? Not unless you ask. That answer almost broke my focus. Caleb would have stood close enough to be seen, close enough to guide the story with a hand on my shoulder. Vincent stood behind the camera instead, outside the frame, leaving the whole lens to me. The red light blinked on. My throat closed. For one terrible second, I saw the ballroom again. Gold lights. White roses. Caleb's smile. My mother's face in an old photograph, tired but gentle, telling me once that fear was not a stop sign, only a weather report. I breathed in. My name is Hannah Miller, I said, and my voice sounded small at first, then steadier because it was mine. Tonight, I left my wedding by choice. I was not taken. I was not harmed. I was not confused. I left because I discovered documents that would have used my marriage to transfer financial responsibility for debts I did not create and did not agree to carry. My hands shook beneath the table, but the camera could not see that. Or maybe it could. Maybe that was fine. The man I was supposed to marry has described my leaving as a crisis. It was not a crisis. It was a decision. I am safe. I have legal counsel. I will cooperate with any proper investigation. But I will not return to a room where my signature matters more than my consent. The word consent sat in the air like a bell. I looked past the camera. Vincent did not move, but his eyes changed. Something like respect. Something like restraint learning a new shape. I kept going. I understand that people will make assumptions because of where I went and who helped me. That is exactly why I am speaking for myself. A dangerous reputation does not erase my choice. A polished reputation does not erase someone else's lie. My voice cracked on the last word, but I did not stop. I am not missing. I am not property. I am not collateral. I am a woman who walked away before midnight. The red light went dark. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Mrs. Vale pressed a hand to her chest. Vincent's communications man looked like he had forgotten what he was supposed to do next. Vincent crossed the room slowly and stopped on the other side of the table, keeping it between us like a promise. "Do you want it released?" he asked. I looked at the frozen image of myself on the monitor, pale and tired and finally unowned. Yes. The video went out 7 minutes later. By the time the first comments started appearing, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. A photo loaded on the screen. Caleb's ring sat on a black velvet tray under bright light. The inside of the band had been opened, revealing something tiny and metallic hidden beneath the gold. Under the photo was one message from Vincent's security team. "Tracker confirmed." I looked up slowly. Vincent had already seen it. His voice was quiet. "Now we know how he planned to find you after the wedding." My hand curled around the edge of the table. The ring was gone, but the feeling of it tightened around my finger one last time. "Then we stopped letting him track my fear," I said. "Then we stopped letting him track my fear." The sentence surprised me after I said it, because it sounded like something a braver woman would say, a woman with shoes on, a lawyer on speed dial, and a life that had never been folded into someone else's debt. But the words were mine, and Vincent did not take them from me. He only nodded once, as if I had placed a strategy on the table instead of a trembling piece of myself. The ring sat on the monitor in the security photo, split open under clean white light, its hidden tracker smaller than a grain of rice and uglier than any scar. I thought about Caleb sliding it onto my finger in the garden behind his parents' house, his eyes soft, his smile practiced, everyone clapping as if love had just become official. Had he known then? Had the tracker already been inside the band while he kissed my knuckles and called me his future? My stomach turned, but the nausea came with anger now, and anger had better posture than fear. Vincent's communications man entered again, careful and quiet. "The statement is spreading," he said. "Local outlets picked it up. Her wording is being quoted directly." Her wording. Mine. I held on to that. "And Caleb?" Vincent asked. His attorney released a response, calling it a misunderstanding caused by emotional distress. I laughed. One short sound. Not happy. Not broken either. Of course he did. Vincent looked at me. "You expected it." Men like Caleb never say a woman is lying when they can say she is fragile. The room went still. Even Mrs. Vale, who had returned with tea no one was drinking, paused near the doorway. Vincent's gray eyes stayed on mine, and I wondered what he saw there. Not a wife. Not even a fake one. Maybe just a woman finally naming the weather she had been forced to stand in. "We need the documents from the hotel," I said. The folder Caleb hid. "The debt papers." "Already secured," Vincent said. I blinked. "How?" "My people retrieved copies from the service office before we left." My first instinct was to be furious that he had moved pieces without asking me. My second was to remember that those papers might be the only reason people believed my video tomorrow. Vincent seemed to read both reactions. "They're sealed. Your attorney opens them." Not mine. That stopped the anger before it could become a wall. "I do not have an attorney. You do now if you want one. Independent. Paid from a fund with no connection to me." "You have a fund for runaway brides?" His mouth almost curved. "For problems that need clean hands." Clean hands. The phrase settled strangely in my chest. Caleb had wanted my hands for signatures. Vincent wanted someone else's hands on the evidence so it could not be dismissed as his influence. That difference mattered. A soft knock came at the open door. Lily stood there in the hallway, still wrapped in her gray sweater, her pale hair loose, her face younger than the house made her seem. "Can I talk to her?" she asked Vincent, but she looked at me. Vincent did not answer for me. He stepped back. "Ask Hannah." Lily's eyes shifted to mine. I nodded. She came in slowly, holding a small wooden box against her chest. Up close, I could see she had been crying earlier. Not dramatically. Quietly, like someone trained to make sadness convenient for other people. "I was not supposed to hear the council meeting," she said. "But I always hear them." I understood that more than I wanted to. She set the box on the table and opened it. Inside was a photograph, old and slightly faded, protected in tissue paper. "My father gave this to me before he died," she said. "He told me if a woman ever came here in white, I should show it to Vincent." The room went quiet. Vincent moved closer, his control tightening around him like a coat buttoned too high. Lily handed me the photograph first, not him. In it, a younger version of my mother stood beside Vincent's father on the steps of a courthouse. My mother looked serious, her hand resting on a file folder. On the back, written in handwriting I recognized from birthday cards and grocery lists, was one sentence. If she ever comes to us in white, protect her. She is the only one who can end the debt. The sentence on the back of the photograph made the room feel smaller than it was. If she ever comes to us in white, protect her. She is the only one who can end the debt. My mother's handwriting had always been graceful, even on grocery lists, even on birthday cards, even in the margins of recipes she never followed exactly. Seeing it there, behind a photograph I had never known existed, felt like hearing her voice through a locked door. I sat down because my legs forgot their purpose. Lily hovered beside the table, worried she had broken something by telling the truth too quickly. Vincent stood very still, his eyes fixed on the picture of my mother beside his father. "What debt?" I asked. No one answered fast enough. I looked at Vincent. "You told me Caleb owed you money." "He does. But this says the debt is older." Vincent's gaze moved from the photograph to Lily, then back to me. "My father died before he could explain it." Lily's voice came softly. "He said Mrs. Miller saved him from making the worst mistake of his life." My throat tightened at the sound of my mother's married name. Elaine Miller. A school librarian with flour on her sleeves every Sunday, who clipped coupons, grew basil in the kitchen window, and told me once that rich men did not scare her because overdue library books taught her persistence. That woman had stood on courthouse steps beside Vincent Cross's father holding a file. "My mother was not a lawyer," I said. "She worked at a library." Vincent looked at me carefully. "Libraries know where records go when people want them forgotten." The words settled over me slowly. My mother had never been powerless. She had just hidden power in quiet places. Lily reached into the wooden box again and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping, yellowed at the edges. "There is more." The article was from 17 years ago. City Pension Review raises questions over private development loans. It named Cross Construction, Price Capital, and a public housing project that had disappeared before it was ever built. My eyes caught on one line. Records were first requested by Elaine Miller, archivist assistant at the Harold Washington Library. Archivist assistant. Not just a librarian. A woman who knew how to find paper trails men thought they had buried. "The debt was not money," I whispered. Vincent's jaw tightened. It was evidence. I looked at Caleb's ring on the monitor, split open under sterile light. I looked at Lily, a girl being used as leverage by men who called it alliance. I looked at Vincent, a man who had built walls so high even grief had to request permission to enter. "My mother found something," I said. "Something tying Caleb's family to yours." Vincent nodded once. "And if she gave it to my father, it may explain why the council still thinks they can force my hand. Because they have been protecting the lie together." The room went quiet again, but this time the silence had direction. My phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. A message appeared with no greeting, only an address on the south side and a sentence beneath it. "Your mother kept copies where children learned to read." I stared at it until the letters blurred. Vincent was already looking at the address. "That building is closed." Lily leaned closer. "What is it?" I knew before I wanted to. My mother's old branch library. Rain pressed against the windows. Somewhere deep in the house, a clock struck 2. 72 hours had begun as a lie, but now it felt like a countdown my mother had started years before I ever wore white. I stood, holding the photograph against my chest. Vincent watched me, waiting for the order he would not give. "We go there," I said. "Not because Caleb wants us to." I looked at Lily, then at the ring, then back at the handwriting that had reached me through 17 years of silence. Because my mother did. We left for the south side before the house could talk me out of it. Mrs. Vale wrapped a gray coat around my shoulders, Lily pressed the old photograph into my hand, and Vincent gave one quiet instruction to the men by the door. No spectacle. No sirens. No story for Caleb to twist before sunrise. The SUV moved through Chicago like a shadow with headlights, past closed diners, wet sidewalks, and apartment windows glowing with lives that had no idea mine had split open behind a luxury hotel. I sat in the back seat with Vincent beside me, Lily safely staying at the estate, the photograph on my lap, and my mother's handwriting burning through the paper like a pulse. Your mother kept copies where children learned to read. The branch library appeared just after 2:30 in the morning, tucked between a boarded-up bakery and a small community center with faded murals on its brick walls. The sign above the door still read Ashland Children's Library, though half the letters had gone dark. I remembered it suddenly, not as a place from the newspaper, but as a smell. Dust jackets, pencil shavings, raincoats drying on metal hooks. My mother had brought me here when I was little, before she got sick, before the world taught me that quiet women could leave thunder behind. I have been here, I whispered. Vincent looked toward the dark windows. Then she wanted you to remember. The front door was locked, but not abandoned. A woman in a red raincoat waited beneath the awning, holding a ring of keys and an umbrella bent by the wind. She was small, maybe 70, with white hair tucked under a knit hat and eyes that went straight to mine. "Hannah Miller?" she asked. My throat tightened. Yes. She nodded once, as if confirming a prophecy she had been tired of carrying. "Your mother said you would come in white. You are late, but close enough." I looked down at the gray coat covering the white sweater beneath, then at the ruined dress folded in memory somewhere behind me. "You knew my mother?" I shelved beside her for 9 years. The woman unlocked the door, and I hid what she could not take home. Inside, the library was cold and still. Moonlight and streetlight crossed the floor in pale squares. Tiny tables sat upside down against one wall. A mural of animals reading books smiled through peeling paint. My chest hurt with the tenderness of it. This was where children learned to read. This was where my mother had hidden the kind of truth powerful men never thought to search for because they did not understand small rooms, sticky fingers, overdue stamps, or women who remembered everything. The woman led us to the back corner, past picture books and a dusty puppet theater, to a shelf marked fairy tales. She said stories were safest where men assumed they were harmless, she said. She pulled down a faded copy of The Snow Queen, then pressed her thumb against the back panel of the shelf. Something clicked. A narrow drawer slid open behind the books. Inside was a metal archive box, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with blue string. My hands shook as I lifted it out. Vincent stood behind me, silent, letting the moment belong to my mother first. The box contained ledgers, photographs, city loan records, and a cassette tape labeled in my mother's handwriting. For Hannah, when the wrong man calls debt love. I pressed my fingers over the label and felt the room blur. The woman in the red coat placed an old tape player on the children's table. She left this too. The tape hissed when I pressed play. Then my mother's voice filled the dark library, soft, tired, and alive. "Hannah, sweetheart, if you are hearing this, then someone tried to make you responsible for a debt that was never yours. Listen carefully. The Prices did not lend money to the Cross family. They stole from the city, blamed the Cross name, and used the lie to control both families for years." Vincent went very still. I looked back at him, but his eyes were on the tape player, his face stripped of every mask. My mother continued. "There is only one way to end it. The woman they try to use as collateral must refuse the contract in public, then release the records with a witness from both sides." My breath caught. A witness from both sides. Me and Vincent. The tape clicked softly as her final words came through. "If he is worthy of standing beside you, he will not ask you to belong to him. He will help you return what was never theirs to take." The tape clicked off, and for a few seconds, nobody breathed loudly enough to disturb the dust. My mother's voice was gone again, leaving only the soft hum of old fluorescent lights and rain ticking against the library windows. I stared at the cassette player on the tiny children's table, the kind of table where I had once colored crooked suns while my mother shelved picture books 10 feet away. She had known. She had known the debt was a lie, known the Prices had dressed theft as business, known the Cross name had been used as both weapon and excuse. And somehow, she had known they would try to use me as the final signature. Vincent stood beside the fairy tale shelf with the archive box open in front of him, one hand resting on the edge, his face carved into stillness. But this stillness was different from the alley, different from the council room. It was not control. It was impact. The kind a person feels when an old wound finally hears the name of the hand that made it. My father went his grave thinking he had failed to stop them, he said quietly. The woman in the red coat crossed herself once, small and quick. Elaine tried to tell him before he died. She said men with too much pride hear warnings as accusations. Vincent's jaw tightened, but he did not argue. I looked down at the ledgers. City development loans. Shell companies. Transfer records. Names I recognized from headlines and gala programs. Caleb's father. Thomas Cross. Men from the council. Men who had watched me sit at their table in a torn wedding dress and measured whether I was useful. A witness from both sides, I said. My voice sounded distant. That is why she wrote that I could end the debt. Vincent looked at me. You do not have to do this tonight. I almost smiled. You keep saying that at the exact moments when I most have to, because choice is not choice if exhaustion makes it for you. The sentence landed softly, but it stayed. I was exhausted. My feet ached. My throat burned. My whole life had become a series of locked rooms, and every door I opened led to a deeper truth. But my mother had left her voice in a library for me. She had waited 17 years inside a cassette tape because she believed I would be strong enough to press play. I could be tired tomorrow. Tonight, I had to be awake. Call the attorney, I said. Mine, not yours. Vincent nodded. No pride. No offense. Already on standby. And a reporter. His eyes narrowed slightly. A careful one. A truthful one. Those are rarer. Find one. This time, his mouth almost curved. Yes, Mrs. Cross. I stiffened. He saw it immediately. The almost smile vanished. Sorry. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. Not yet. Something changed in his eyes, not disappointment, not possession, but understanding. Not unless you choose it. The woman in the red coat watched us with the faintest sadness, as if she was seeing another story laid gently over the one my mother had left behind. My phone buzzed on the table. Caleb. Of course. His message was short. Come back before you ruin everyone. I stared at it until my fear did not answer. Then I typed no. The archive box goes public. His reply came within seconds. Then Cross loses everything too. I looked at Vincent. He says you lose everything. Vincent closed the box, wrapping the oilcloth back around the records with careful hands. Maybe. And you're still standing here? His gray eyes met mine across the children's room, under painted animals and shelves of fairy tales that had outlived every lie men told in marble rooms. Your mother said return what was never theirs to take. He lifted the box. That includes my name. The old librarian unlocked the side exit for us. Dawn had not arrived yet, but the black sky had softened at the edges. The rain had slowed to a mist. Vincent's men waited near the curb, quiet and alert. I paused under the awning, holding my mother's cassette in one hand and my phone in the other. For the first time since the ballroom, I did not feel like a bride running away. I felt like a woman walking toward the place where the story had to be corrected. Vincent stopped beside me, not ahead, not behind. Where do you want to go? He asked. I looked at the archive box, then at the city beginning to wake. Back to the council, I said. And this time, they listened to me. We returned to the Cross estate just as the sky began turning from black to bruised blue, and the mansion looked different in the thin light before morning. Less like a kingdom. More like a place built by men who thought stone could outlive truth. The council was already waiting in the dining room, called from sleep and pride, their suits not as sharp as before, their faces colder for having been made uncertain. Thomas Cross sat at the far end of the table with his cane across his knees. Caleb stood beside him. That was the first thing I noticed. Not near the door. Not outside. Beside him. The groom I had run from and the uncle who had judged me barefoot were standing on the same side of the room, and suddenly every polite word from the night before had teeth. Caleb smiled when he saw me, but it did not reach his eyes. Hannah, he said. You look exhausted. I am, I answered. That does not make me wrong. Vincent walked in beside me carrying the archive box. He did not sit at the head of the table this time. He placed the box in front of me, then stepped back. The entire council noticed. So did Caleb. "What is this?" Thomas asked. I rested my hand on the oilcloth. "The reason all of you were so interested in my signature." A few men shifted in their chairs. Caleb sighed softly, performing disappointment for the room. "She has been manipulated." I looked at him. "You hid a tracker in my ring." His smile thinned. "For your safety. You put my name on debt documents I never approved. To protect us from legal complications. You called me unstable when I refused to sign them. Because you disappeared with Vincent Cross." "No," I said, and the word cut through the room cleaner than any shout could have. "Because I stopped being useful." Silence followed. It did not feel empty. It felt full of men deciding whether the truth had entered too publicly to be pushed back out. Vincent's attorney arrived with mine, Nora Whitfield, a woman in a charcoal suit whose calm made the room look childish. Behind her came a reporter I recognized from my statement, carrying no camera crew, only a recorder and a face that knew the difference between gossip and evidence. Thomas's eyes hardened. "This is a family matter." Nora set her briefcase on the table. "Not when public funds are involved." That was when the room truly changed. Public funds. The phrase moved like cold air across every face. I opened the archive box with hands that no longer shook. Ledgers. Copies. City loan documents. My mother's cassette. The photograph of her with Vincent's father. The old librarian's signed statement. Nora laid each item out with the care of someone building a bridge over a very deep fall. Elaine Miller found records showing that development funds were diverted through Price Capital and shell companies tied to members of this council, she said. Those debts were later assigned informally to the Cross name to create leverage. Miss Miller's daughter was being pressured into signing documents that would reactivate and redirect portions of that liability. Caleb's face lost color one layer at a time. Thomas leaned on his cane, but he did not stand. "You cannot prove intent." I picked up the cassette player the old librarian had given me and pressed play. My mother's voice filled the dining room, soft and steady from 17 years away. "The Prices did not lend money to the Cross family. They stole from the city, blamed the Cross name, and used the lie to control both families for years." No one interrupted her. No one could. Not because the tape was loud, but because truth spoken by the dead has a way of making cowards superstitious. When the tape ended, I looked at Caleb. "You needed me to sign before midnight because my name closed the loop." His mouth opened. Nothing useful came out. I turned to Thomas. "And you needed Vincent married to someone you controlled because Lily was next." At Lily's name, Vincent finally moved. Only a step. Enough for the room to remember that the girl upstairs was not a bargaining chip anymore. "This council is finished," he said. Thomas laughed once, dry and sharp. "You would destroy your own house over her?" Vincent looked at me, then at the archive box, then toward the staircase where Lily stood half-hidden in the morning light. "No," he said. "I am returning what was never theirs to take." Nora's recorder clicked softly. Outside, the first siren sounded in the distance, not dramatic, not close enough to be theatrical, but real enough to make Caleb look toward the windows. I stood there in borrowed clothes, with no ring, no bouquet, no veil, and understood that the bride they had planned to use had vanished after all. In her place was the woman my mother had trusted to come back with proof. The sirens never became the center of the story. That surprised me. I had expected chaos when the truth finally entered the room, but what came instead was paperwork, recorded statements, frozen accounts, and men who suddenly became very careful with every word. Caleb stopped smiling first. Thomas stopped speaking second. The council, so loud in its silence the night before, began to shrink under the weight of documents my mother had hidden where children learned to read. Nora handled the evidence with clean hands. The reporter took notes without turning my pain into spectacle. Vincent stood near the window with Lily beside him, his hand resting lightly on the back of her chair, not as a ruler protecting territory, but as a brother finally letting a house built on fear become smaller than the girl inside it. By noon, Caleb Price was no longer calling me unstable. His attorneys were calling mine. By evening, the first story ran with my name spelled correctly and my words quoted in full. Not missing. Not taken. Not collateral. The next morning, I returned to the hotel with Nora and Mrs. Vale to collect what was mine. The ballroom had been cleared, but a few white petals still clung to the carpet near the aisle we never used. My wedding dress hung in a garment bag in the bridal suite, cleaned badly, as if someone had tried to remove the evidence of rain from satin and failed. I looked at it for a long time. Then I took the veil, left the dress, and walked out barefoot by choice. 3 months later, the debt records became part of a public case that reached farther than Caleb, farther than Thomas, farther than Vincent's family had feared. City officials resigned. Price Capital dissolved under investigation. The council that had treated Lily like a bargaining chip lost the power to decide anything about her life. She went back to school in Boston and sent me a photograph of herself standing in front of a dorm room door, grinning like a girl who had discovered walls could open. Vincent sent no gifts during those months. No flowers. No jewelry. No grand gesture dressed as apology. He sent information when my attorney requested it, space when I asked for it, and silence when the world became too loud. That was how I began to understand him. Not as the man who said he needed a wife in an alley, but as the man who learned that needing someone did not give him the right to hold them. I moved into a small apartment above a bakery in Lincoln Park, with uneven floors, noisy pipes, and windows that fogged when it rained. I bought my own phone plan, opened my own bank account, signed my name so many times it stopped feeling like a weapon in someone else's hand and started feeling like proof I was still here. On the 73rd day, Vincent came to my door. He stood in the hallway wearing a dark coat, no guards visible, rain shining on his shoulders like the night we met. Our agreement ended yesterday, he said. I leaned against the doorframe. I know. I wanted to make sure you knew too. That almost made me smile. You came all this way to remind me I am free of you? His eyes held mine, steady and gray. Yes. There were men who would have made that sound tragic. Vincent made it sound like respect. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. And if I choose coffee? He looked down for half a second, and when he looked back, there was the smallest curve at the edge of his mouth. Then I negotiate poorly and accept. We walked to the bakery downstairs. No black SUVs at the curb. No council. No cameras. Just rain, warm bread, and 2 people sitting across from each other, while the city moved on without asking permission. Months later, I donated the wedding dress to a theater department that needed fabric for costumes. They turned the skirt into clouds for a school play. I kept the veil, not because I wanted to remember Caleb, but because I wanted to remember the woman who ran with it trailing behind her and did not stop. Sometimes people ask when I fell in love with Vincent Cross. They expect me to say the alley, or the council room, or the moment he stood beside me while my mother's voice played from an old cassette. But the truth is quieter than that. I began to love him when he knocked on my door after the agreement ended, not to ask me back, not to claim what the world thought he had taken, but to make sure I knew I owed him nothing. That was the moment the word wife stopped sounding like a cage. Not because he needed one. Because I did not. My mother once hid the truth in a library because she believed stories could survive powerful men. She was right. The story they wrote for me ended in a ballroom. The one I chose began in the rain. And real love, I learned, does not say perfect, I needed a wife. It says, you are free now and waits to see whether you stay.